The doorbell rings at 8:03 a.m., a bright chime threading itself through the quiet of my glass and stone sanctuary. I'm barefoot on the kitchen's cool slate, a mug of coffee warming my hands, the redwoods just beyond the windows swaying like they know some secret I don't. The gate camera wakes on my tablet. 4 faces crystallize from the sunlight. My parents. My brother. My sister. For a second the mug slips in my grip. Hot coffee kisses my wrist and I hiss. It's been 12 years since I was told in so many efficient words, to stop disturbing the family's peace. 12 years since I learned how loud silence can be when it comes from people who raised you. They look older. The camera's wide angle exaggerates the distance I carefully installed between us. Steel, stone, code. Mom's mouth is the same line it was the last time I saw it up close. Dad's jaw moves as if he's grinding a confession he will never say. My sister adjusts her sunglasses like she's about to step onto a runway, not my driveway. My brother presses the intercom and leans forward as if he can will his way into my life. Camila, he says to the machine. We need to talk. Need. Interesting word. If you're hearing this on my channel, you already know I don't tell this part for pity. I tell it for anyone who grew up as the empty chair at their own table. Tell me where you're listening from. And remember, the first boundary you draw is for yourself. I hit pause on the feed. The redwoods hold their breath. The steaming mug leaves a ring on marble. Before I open the line, before I decide what version of myself answers, I have to walk back through a house I no longer live in, a timeline I no longer occupy. I have to remember the first time someone told me what family meant, and all the times they showed me it didn't include me. We looked perfect from the sidewalk back then. A 2-story stucco square with a neat yard and a maple that turned theatrical in October. Dad, Victor, was a civil engineer who could make a bridge look effortless and a feeling feel like a design flaw. Mom, Lucille, was the sort of elementary school teacher parents requested because their children came home reciting poems and washing their hands without being asked. My brother Adrian was 2 grades ahead of me and permanently bathed in Friday night floodlights. My sister Bianca was a year older and understood early that the world opens for beautiful girls who act like they're expected. And then there was me. Camila, who read the furnace manual cover to cover because I liked knowing how warmth worked. Camila, who remembered everyone's birthday and the day the dog stopped sleeping in my room and never came back. Camila, who learned to be polite about missing things. Family comes first, Dad would say the way men say grace, out of habit not hunger. On my 10th birthday I woke to the smell of butter and sugar and the squeak of balloons against ceiling paint. My best friend Ava was bringing a disposable camera. I had handwritten invitations on glittering cardstock Mom let me choose at the craft store. I put on the velvet dress Abuela Rosa saved up to buy me and smoothed the skirt over my knees and thought, today I am included on purpose. At breakfast Mom set down a plate of pancakes with one candle stuck in the stack like a kind apology. Change of plans, she said, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Adrian's team made the final. The whole family should be there. My party is at 2. I heard my voice come out careful, all soft edges. Everyone's coming at 2. We'll reschedule, Dad said, squeezing my shoulder like that made it tender. When it comes to these things the family shows up. The family is already here, I said, and the silence that followed taught me more about our hierarchy than any flowchart ever could. We made phone calls. I made my voice sound grown, telling 10-year-olds that sometimes the world tips toward other people. We drove to the stadium and the bleachers were loud and the velvet dress was wrong and it was very bright for a day that felt so dim. The maple at home was probably holding its colors like it was promised a show. No one sang. That night there was no cake. There was leftover pizza and a medal hung around Adrian's neck and the plastic fork I tossed because it had bent itself into a question mark. Later when I cried quietly because loudly always made things worse, Bianca rolled onto her back and sighed. You're being dramatic, she said, the ceiling fan multiplying her voice. It was just a party. To be fair, she didn't know. She thought confetti and attention were renewable resources. It wasn't always like that. There were islands. Abuela Rosa was a lighthouse with 2 good knees and a laugh that made you feel like you'd invented joy. She wore lipstick even to the grocery store and brought me used books wrapped in tissue paper like precious things. Mijita, she'd whisper in the kitchen while we waited for the tea kettle, there's a light in you that doesn't need permission. She would slip me a slice of cake when there was no celebration, and somehow it still counted. Don't fill Camila's head with fantasies, Mom would say after Abuela left, the air smelling of rosewater and cinnamon. We want her to be realistic. The funny thing about realistic is how often it means small. In 5th grade, my science fair project mapped the bacteria growth on cafeteria trays and proposed a new nightly sanitizing schedule that would have saved the district money and stomach aches. I wore a sweater vest and tried not to sweat through it. When they announced I was advancing to regionals, I scanned the audience for my father and found a space shaped exactly like him. He had a site meeting, Mom said, as if the absence were an appointment I'd failed to attend. He told me he'd try, I said. He did, she answered, as if effort counted when it arrived without you. He told me later that science wasn't a spectator sport, and I filed it under definitions you shouldn't trust. Middle school was when the house began shrinking around me. Bianca learned the choreography of whispers, how to stop them when I entered a room and start them when I left. She borrowed my sweaters without asking and returned them smelling like someone who had been chosen. Once, at a sleepover, she stood on the other side of a glass sliding door and held up my diary like a trophy until I watched myself become a joke through my own words reflected back. Adrian was kinder in the way people are kind when they're not required to notice you. He patted my head the day he got his license and asked if I wanted a ride to the store for gum. We drove with the windows down and he turned the radio up and let me control the air vents. I remember it because so few things were offered without ledger lines. In high school, I learned early to stop asking for rides. I learned to memorize. I learned workarounds. You can sit at a table without being asked if you're the first one there. You can put cupcakes on the counter and no one will ask who they're for if you put them out like they belong to everyone. I joined the robotics club because I wanted to build something with a beginning, a middle, and an end. The nights smelled like solder and ambition. The boys' jokes were clumsy but not cruel. We took second at state, which at home converted into, "So will you be home in time to help set the table?" Acceptance season arrived with really official envelopes. You see, Berkeley. Carnegie Mellon. A scholarship letter that made me sit down on the floor of the foyer because my knees forgot how. Mom smiled and said, "That's wonderful," and then asked if I'd considered the cost of moving away. Dad grunted something about out-of-state tuition and budgets, and I pointed at the scholarship like a flare in bad weather. "We'll think about it," he said. "You're young. There's a lot to figure out." Young was always another way to say pliable. Abuela kissed my forehead and said, "You're leaving, the way people say congratulations and good luck and I'll miss you all at once." She took off a thin silver chain with a tiny opal and fastened it around my neck. "For when you need to remember what you already know," she said. I wore it under my shirt like a password. The spring I turned 18, Bianca was crowned prom queen. Someone put the tiara on the kitchen counter afterward, a bright circle resting on a pile of unpaid bills, and I thought about crowns and what they mean and how some fit better on mantles than heads. "Family comes first," Dad said at dinner the night I told them I'd picked Berkeley. He said it flat, as if it were both a blessing and an indictment. "We need you close. Your mother's schedule is intense next year. Your sister's looking at internships in the city. Adrian might take a job out of state. We don't know yet. What does that have to do with where I go to college?" I asked. Mom set down her fork and looked at me with the kind of patience that made my skin itch. "We're saying we need you here." To do what exactly they did not say. But something in me, something Abuela had been watering for years, rose like a spine. "I'm going," I said, and learned how quickly love can be confused with logistics. You can't fast-forward the pour, but you can compress it. Berkeley meant 4 girls in a 2-bedroom apartment, side jobs that taught me the architecture of exhaustion, a laptop that wheezed when I asked too much of it. It meant computer science lectures at 9 a.m. and a data structures lab at 5 and a dishwashing shift that began at 10. It meant learning which bus stops were safe after midnight and which neighborhoods turned into riddles after dark. It also meant my fingers humming the first time I solved a problem I thought would break me, and the way my professor, Dr. Machin, looked at my code the way Abuela used to look at my face. "You see patterns other people overlook," she said, circling a section where I'd rewritten a standard algorithm out of stubbornness. "That's not just intelligence. That's attention." I emailed home less than hardly at all. The replies I did receive were terse updates that read like minutes from a meeting I hadn't been invited to. When I did go back for holidays, I learned how to fold myself into corners of rooms, how to be affable and unsticky. Bianca's boyfriend, who would become her fiancé, called me kiddo, even after I told him not to. Adrian talked about a knee injury as if it had rewritten his entire autobiography, and maybe it had. Abuela's house remained the same. A couch that hugged you, a table that understood elbows, a radio station that played the songs she grew up with. She told me to take the good crystal because no one here appreciates it, and wrapped it in newspaper because even precious things are allowed to be practical. Senior year, during midterms, my phone lit up at 6:12 a.m. It was my mother. The words came out of her neatly like she'd cut them from a template. Camila, it's Abuela. There was a heart attack. They tried. She's gone. The connection cut and I found myself on the kitchen floor again like the day of the scholarship letter, but this time my knees knew exactly what they were doing. I flew home. I slept in my old room, now suddenly echoing with a version of me who hadn't known enough to be careful. The funeral was on a Tuesday. The church smelled like lilies and pledge spray. People hugged me like they meant it and then moved on to talk about traffic. After the service, we all returned to my parents' house, the table covered with casseroles in loaned dishes. Someone had already set out the good crystal, and the sight of it made my throat tighten. Mom's voice had that brisk hospitality she saved for after suffering. "We'll do the reading tomorrow afternoon," she said to no one and everyone. "The lawyer is coming here. Tomorrow afternoon." The words orbited my ribs like a clock. I lay awake that night and watched the streetlight paint slow stripes on the ceiling and thought about the opal at my throat and the last thing Abuela ever told me: make a life that recognizes you. The next day the house filled with relatives from both sides. Second cousins I'd only met through holiday cards. A great-aunt whose perfume arrived 2 minutes before she did. Bianca in an ivory blouse that made her look like a magazine page. Dad didn't meet my eyes. Mom moved plates around on the counter just to keep her hands busy. The lawyer arrived with a leather folder and a voice like a neutral-colored suit. We all sat at the dining table, polished wood heavy chairs, a chandelier that once dropped a crystal and made everyone gasp like the house bled. I sat near the end, the chair that always squeaked when you shifted. I folded my hands, pressed my fingers into the opal until the stone warmed. The lawyer cleared his throat. Paper whispered. "To my granddaughter Camila," he read, and the room inhaled in one sharp synchronized breath. "I leave." I didn't know then that the words in his mouth would rearrange everything I thought I understood about belonging. I didn't know that the definition of family was about to become the lock I would learn to pick for the rest of my life. I only knew that the chandelier light made tiny broken rainbows on the table, and that some part of me already understood how to build something from shards. Outside, the maple held on to its leaves like a secret. Inside, the lawyer read on. The lawyer's voice was steady, but every word felt like a stone dropping into deep water. "To my granddaughter Camila," he repeated, "I leave the silver locket, an heirloom from my own mother, and the sum of $7,000. You have always been the one who carried my light forward. Use this to remind yourself that even the smallest ember can grow into a fire." The room went very still. I felt the opal at my throat grow heavier. $7,000. A locket. That was it. And yet my throat closed, not because of disappointment but because of recognition. Abuela had seen me. Even in her absence she'd chosen me. She knew what I would need. Something small enough to carry everywhere but strong enough to remind me I mattered. My mother was the first to break the silence. She let out a laugh that was sharp as broken glass. "That's all? A necklace and some pocket money?" Honestly, Mother always had a strange way of playing favorites. I turned to look at her. She wasn't grieving. She was irritated. Dad's face was turning red, his jaw tight. He slammed his hand on the table, making the water glasses tremble. "This is outrageous," he barked. "Rosa coddled Camila her whole life. For no reason. Always making her think she was special." My chest rose, my voice stronger than I thought it could be. Maybe because she was the only one who ever treated me like family. That sentence broke something open. "You want to talk about family?" Dad's voice thundered. "We took you in when no one else would. We gave you a roof, an education, a name. And this is the gratitude you show us." The words lodged in my ears like splinters. "We took you in. What are you talking about?" I whispered. Mom shot him a warning glance. "Too late. You're not even our daughter," he spat. "We adopted you when you were 2. Your mother was Lucille's college roommate, some reckless girl named Marina. She had you out of wedlock, then got herself killed in a car accident. There was no father in the picture. No family. No one else wanted you. So we, out of the goodness of our hearts, took you. The walls swayed. The chandelier above blurred into broken stars. Not their daughter. Not their blood. Just a charity case. My sister Bianca leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs. Honestly, Camila, you should be grateful. Do you know how many kids end up in the system? At least you had a family. I turned to her. A family? You mean the birthdays you forgot? The times you locked me out of your room? The dinners where I was invisible? You're being emotional, Mom said flatly, as if that disqualified me from truth. Finding out my whole life was a lie seems like a reasonable time to be emotional. I shot back. Adrian, my brother, the one who was supposed to be the protector, kept his eyes on the table, silent. That silence told me more than his words ever could. I pressed my palms against the polished wood. So tell me, was anything real? Did you ever love me? Or was I just an obligation you regretted? The silence that followed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. I stood. My chair scraped against the floor like a warning bell. Fine. Believe. But remember this. You didn't save me. You erased me. And one day you'll regret it. I walked out, the opal at my neck burning like a brand, Abuela's locket tight in my hand. I didn't look back. Not once. That was the day I stopped being their daughter. The exclusion became official. No Thanksgiving invitations. No Christmas calls. No family reunions. Bianca posted photos with captions like, "Complete family," as if to remind the world I was not included. Dad sent me one email, clinical as a business memo, asking me to respect the family's privacy. As though I were some intruder. But I had $7,000. I had Abuela's locket. And I had a vow. To build a life so big, so undeniable, that they would regret ever treating me like nothing. $7,000 is not much. But it was my beginning. San Francisco was loud, expensive, alive in a way my parents' suburb never was. I rented a room in a peeling old house with two strangers I found on a community board. The room was barely big enough for a twin bed and a desk. The bathroom leaked. The kitchen smelled faintly of onions no matter how often it was scrubbed. But it was mine. Half my savings vanished in the first month. Rent, security deposit, textbooks. I learned to live on ramen and peanut butter sandwiches. I cut my own hair in the bathroom mirror. I walked miles to save bus fare. During the day, I worked at a tiny software company as a tech support assistant, answering phones for customers who forgot their passwords. It was tedious, underpaid, and had nothing to do with my degree. But it was a door and I wasn't going to let it close. At night I coded. Hours and hours, teaching myself new languages, reading free cybersecurity courses online, building small projects. Sleep became optional. Hunger became familiar. But failure? That wasn't allowed. 6 months later, I went to a free cybersecurity workshop at the public library. The speaker was Dr. Mei Chin, a Berkeley professor renowned in the field. I sat in the back row, notebook open, my hand cramping from how fast I was writing. When it ended, people clapped politely and left. I stayed. I forced my shaking hands to lift. "Professor Chin," I asked, "what about behavioral encryption systems? What if we analyzed patterns instead of just passwords?" Her eyes narrowed, not in judgment but in interest. "That's an advanced question," she said. "Most people don't even think that way." For the first time in years I felt seen. "You have a mind for this," she told me. "Come to my hackathon next month. Show me what you can do." That invitation was the spark. The ember Abuela left me. And I swore to myself, I would turn it into a fire. The hackathon was held in a sprawling hall at UC Berkeley, rows of long tables buzzing with laptops, wires, and half-empty coffee cups. Teams were forming, huddling together like soldiers before battle. I stood at the edge for a moment, clutching my notebook, wondering if I belonged here. I remembered Abuela's words. "There's a light in you that doesn't need permission." So I walked in. I joined a group of strangers. Ravi, an Indian graduate student in electrical engineering. Zoe, a biology major who was fascinated by data. And Max, a computer science sophomore with more caffeine than blood in his veins. They didn't know me, and that was the beauty of it. I wasn't the invisible daughter here. I was just Camila. The challenge was simple on paper. Identify vulnerabilities in a widely used financial app and propose a fix. In reality, it was a labyrinth of code, encryption, and deadlines that ticked louder than the wall clock. As hours passed, I noticed things others missed. Tiny behavioral inconsistencies in user logins, overlooked because they seemed insignificant. But to me they were patterns. Clues. What if, I said, my voice hesitant at first, instead of focusing only on passwords, we build a system that learns how a person types. Their rhythm, their speed, even how they hesitate on certain letters. It's unique like a fingerprint. Ravi paused. Keystroke dynamics as authentication? Max frowned. That's not common. Zoe leaned forward, eyes bright. But it makes sense. Behavioral biometrics. We worked until dawn. Fingers flying, code compiling, failures stacking up and then unraveling into breakthroughs. I hadn't felt that alive in years. The hunger, the loneliness, the exhaustion, they faded behind the glow of possibility. When we presented, I stood before a panel of industry experts, my palms sweating, voice trembling at first but steadying with every word. I explained how our system could catch fraudulent logins before they even began, how security could be about behavior, not just passwords. When I finished, there was silence. Then applause. We didn't win first place. We won third. But that was enough. More than enough. Because one of the judges, a venture capitalist named Travis, pulled me aside afterward. "You've got something rare," he said. "Not just talent. Vision." It was the first time anyone had used that word about me. Vision. The weeks that followed were a blur. Professor Chin introduced me to her network, forwarding articles, resources, invitations. She became my mentor, filling the space Abuela once held. But investors? That was another story. 27 rejections in a row. Interesting idea, but you're too young. Come back when you have a working prototype. We typically invest in founders with more experience. Every rejection echoed like my family's voices. Not enough. Not enough. Not enough. But I refused to let them be right. So I worked harder. I took a second job bartending at a tech hangout. By day I answered customer support calls. By night I poured whiskey for engineers bragging about seed rounds and exits. Sometimes after midnight I'd sketch algorithms on bar napkins. Some nights customers would laugh. Other nights they'd lean in and listen. One of them was Travis, the same judge from the hackathon. He came back week after week asking questions about my idea. I thought he was just humoring me. Until one night, after I explained how the system could evolve with user behavior over time, he set his glass down and said, "I've been testing you, Camila. Seeing if you really know your stuff. You do. You're the real deal. Send me your business plan." 2 weeks later, he wired $200,000 into an account under my name. It wasn't much compared to Silicon Valley norms. But for me it was everything. It meant I could quit the tech support job. It meant I could rent a small office. It meant I could build CyberShield. The first months were brutal. I coded 16 hours a day, fought bugs that refused to die, and taught myself skills I didn't know I'd need. There were nights I wanted to quit. Nights I curled up on the office floor, staring at the ceiling tiles, clutching Abuela's locket for strength. But each morning I started again. 8 months later I had a prototype. Rough, imperfect but real. Travis arranged a demo for bigger investors. I stood in a glass-walled office, presenting to people whose pens probably cost more than my entire apartment. I showed them how CyberShield could detect unauthorized users in milliseconds, how it could revolutionize digital security. When I finished, one of them leaned back and said, "This is genuinely innovative. With refinement, this could change the game." For the first time, doors began to open. Funding. Partnerships. Recognition. CyberShield was born. But success was a strange companion. I still walked home past luxury condos I couldn't afford. I still ate ramen when money was tight. I still cried at night sometimes, when the silence of my empty room reminded me I had no one to call. And yet, inside that silence, something grew. A fire. The fire of someone who had been told she didn't belong. The fire of someone who would prove them wrong. The first version of CyberShield was scrappy, raw, and full of flaws. But it worked. And in Silicon Valley, working was enough to open doors. Within 6 months of that demo, we signed our first licensing deal with a mid-sized financial firm desperate for stronger authentication. The check they wrote felt unreal in my hands. I deposited it, and for the first time in my life I wasn't counting down the days until rent was due. The office grew too small. The ramen diet gave way to real groceries. My weekends weren't spent bartending anymore. Instead I was hiring. Interviewing. Building a team that believed in what I saw. By year 2, CyberShield had 20 employees. By year 3, we had Fortune 500 companies knocking on our door, contracts worth millions on the table. Headlines started to appear. Young founder reinvents cybersecurity, behavioral biometrics, the future of safety. And then came the question from a journalist that made me pause mid-interview. Camila, how does it feel to be seen as a visionary? Visionary. There it was again. A word my father never would have used. A word my mother would have rolled her eyes at. A word my siblings would have turned into a joke at the dinner table. I answered calmly. But later, in the quiet of my office, I let myself feel it. For the first time, I wasn't invisible. Success, however, was a cold companion. I moved from my cramped apartment to a sleek condo overlooking the bay. Floor-to-ceiling windows, furniture imported from Italy, a Tesla parked in the garage. It was the kind of life I had once only seen in magazines. And yet, when I unlocked the door at night, silence greeted me. No one asked how my day had gone. No one cared that I had secured another $1 million deal. The lights came on to an empty space, and sometimes that emptiness echoed louder than the applause of investors. I tried to ignore it, to bury myself in work. But loneliness is patient. It waits. There were moments I found myself scrolling through social media at 2 a.m., landing on Bianca's perfectly staged family photos. Birthday parties, baby showers, reunions, always captioned with words like, grateful for family, or, everyone together. Everyone except me. The photos never hurt in the way they used to. Not like knives. More like stones in my pocket. Heavy but familiar. So I did something about it. If I couldn't have the family I was born into, I would build one. I started with my team. I made birthdays mandatory celebrations. Small victories were applauded. Big ones were rewarded. No one would ever feel invisible on my watch. Layla, my brilliant chief technology officer, became like a sister. Marcus, our CFO, was cautious but loyal. Derek, our COO, could organize chaos into harmony. They started as colleagues. Over time they became something else. A chosen family. Professor Chin, still Dr. Chin to everyone else, was more than a mentor now. She came to our office with her husband and kids, filling the halls with laughter. Travis, my first investor, became a friend I trusted more than most. Piece by piece I built a circle. And slowly the emptiness quieted. By the 5th year, CyberShield was valued at over $200 million. By the 8th, $500 million. When we signed a $150 million contract with a consortium of banks, I signed the documents with Abuela's locket around my neck, whispering a thank you only she would hear. But the more success grew, the louder the question inside me became. Where do I belong? Money could buy a condo. Cars. Vacations. But it couldn't rewrite the memories of canceled birthdays, or the sound of my father saying, "We took you in." So on the company's 10th anniversary, I did something radical. I bought land in Atherton, the most exclusive neighborhood in Silicon Valley. 3 acres of space, a sprawling estate with a main house, a guest house, and gardens that seemed to stretch into forever. "This is more than a house," my financial advisor said. "It's a statement," I replied. And it was. I filled the rooms with books. Designed a library like the one in Beauty and the Beast, the fairy tale I'd clung to as a child. I built a memorial garden for Abuela Rosa, with a bench engraved with her name, surrounded by her favorite flowers. It wasn't just a house. It was proof. Proof that I hadn't just survived. I had built a life where I mattered. The mansion became my sanctuary. A place where I hosted charity galas, raising millions for foster children and scholarships for young women in tech. A place where my team gathered for celebrations. A place where, for the first time, I felt I was exactly where I was meant to be. And yet, late at night, I would sometimes stand on the terrace looking out over the gardens and feel a hollow ache. Because no matter how much I built, one truth remained. The family that should have loved me was still out there. Silent. Absent. Choosing not to see me. I thought I had made peace with it. Until the morning my security system chimed, alerting me to visitors at the gate. When I picked up the tablet and saw their faces, I nearly dropped my coffee. My parents. My brother. My sister. After 12 years of silence, they had come back. They stood at the iron gate like ghosts, their shapes blurred by the California sun. My father's once rigid shoulders were bent, his gray hair cropped close. My mother held her purse tight against her ribs as if it might shield her from judgment. Adrian, my brother, shifted his weight, avoiding the camera's lens. And Bianca, she still carried herself like the world owed her its spotlight, though her eyes flickered with something I had never seen before: hesitation. The intercom crackled. Camila, my father's voice rasped. We need to come in. We need your help. Help. The word was acid in my mouth. For 12 years they hadn't wanted my voice, my presence, my existence. Now suddenly I was necessary. I didn't answer. I let the silence press against them, watching as my mother tried again. We just want to talk, she said, her tone softer than I remembered. Please. We've come a long way. Her words triggered a memory I couldn't silence. You should be grateful we took you in. I set my coffee down and leaned closer to the screen. Talk? About what? About how I was never enough. Or about how you erased me. Bianca rolled her eyes, but the flicker of guilt betrayed her. Camila, don't be dramatic. We're family. Families fight, but they forgive. We forgive you. I laughed. It startled even me. You forgive me. For what? Surviving without you. Adrian finally looked into the camera. His face was older, worn. Things are different now. Dad's retired. The business isn't what it used to be. We've hit some difficulties. There was not remorse, not love, need, money. The silence between us stretched. I let them feel it. Camila, my father pushed, his tone sharp. We're not asking for charity. We're asking for family. The word family cracked something open in me. The birthdays forgotten. The medals unacknowledged. The way they had sat in that dining room and confirmed I wasn't theirs. Family had always been a one-way contract in their house. And now they wanted to renegotiate. I tapped the control panel. The gate remained closed, but my voice filled the speaker. Do you remember the last thing you said to me, Dad? You told me to leave if I couldn't show gratitude. Do you remember, Mom, how you sat in silence when he said I wasn't your daughter? Bianca, do you remember the captions you wrote, complete family, while you cropped me out of every memory? Adrian, do you remember how you stayed quiet while they burned me out of their lives? Their faces shifted, guilt and frustration mixing like oil and water. I remember, I said, my tone steady now. And because I remember, you don't get to walk back in just because it's convenient. Bianca's voice snapped. You think you're better than us because you made some money? You think this mansion makes you family? I leaned closer to the camera, lowering my voice. No. Love makes you family. Respect makes you family. And you never gave me either. I pressed the button. The intercom cut off. The gate stayed closed. They stood there for another minute, whispering among themselves, hope draining from their faces. Finally they turned back toward their car. I watched them leave, my pulse steady, my chest heavy. For the first time the power was mine. But power doesn't erase wounds. It only exposes how deep they go. That night I sat in my library, shelves filled with books I'd once only dreamed of owning. I opened Abuela Rosa's locket, tracing the tiny engraving inside. Siempre brillas, Majita. You always shine, my little one. I had shined. Brighter than they ever thought possible. And yet, as the mansion's silence wrapped around me, I wondered if even light could banish the shadows of blood. The gate was closed. But the past wasn't finished knocking. 3 days after they appeared at my gate, a letter arrived. Heavy parchment, my father's handwriting stiff with formality. Camila. We only came to ask for help. The family business is collapsing. Adrian lost his job. Bianca's husband walked out, left debts. Your mother's health is failing. We thought maybe you would remember that family comes first. We raised you. We gave you everything. All we ask is a share of what you've built. It's only fair. Fair. That word almost made me laugh. I folded the letter neatly and slipped it into the drawer of my desk beside the locket. Then I drafted my reply. Dear Victor, Lucille, Adrian, Bianca. You're right. Family comes first. But you taught me what family is, and what it isn't. Family does not forget birthdays. Family does not erase your name from gatherings. Family does not hide your identity until it's a weapon. Family does not stand in silence while you beg to be seen. So if you're asking for help from family, I'm afraid you've come to the wrong person. I'm not your daughter. I never was. And now I never will be. Camila. I sent it by courier. A week later, silence answered back. The silence didn't ache the way it once had. Because by then CyberShield's IPO had launched. Overnight I wasn't just wealthy. I was a billionaire on paper, my face on the cover of Forbes, the visionary who reinvented security. At the gala celebrating our launch, I stood on stage before investors, politicians, and celebrities. Cameras flashed, champagne bubbled, and applause rolled like thunder. My success, I told the crowd, is not just about technology. It's about resilience. It's about proving that the people who try to erase you don't get the final word. You do. The room erupted. My team raised their glasses. My chosen family surrounded me. And for the first time I felt whole. Months later I saw them again by accident. A news clip of a foreclosure auction. My parents' old house, stripped of furniture, sold to strangers. Adrian stood on the curb, hands stuffed in his pockets. Bianca looked away from the camera, sunglasses hiding her eyes. I watched in silence. Not gloating. Not even angry. Just finished. They had chosen to discard me. Now life had discarded them. That evening I walked into my garden. The roses were in bloom, their scent rising with the summer air. I sat on the bench with Abuela's name carved into the stone. I did it, I whispered. I built the life you always believed I could. And I never sold your locket. I never let them take away what you gave me. For a long time I sat there letting the quiet settle. And in that quiet I realized something. My revenge was never about shutting them out. It was about proving, to them, to myself, that I was always enough. When they see my name in the papers, when they drive past my billboards, when they hear people call me visionary, they will remember the girl they threw away. And that memory will haunt them far more than my words ever could. So when the next knock comes at the gate, whether it's them or someone else, I won't answer. Because I don't need to. The mansion, the company, the people who stand beside me now. These are my answers. And that is my silent revenge.